Welcome to the Hidden Philanthropist podcast, proudly presented by the Purdie Foundation. Join us as we uncover the art of giving back.
Hey listeners, if you've been searching for ways to contribute to the zero carbon energy movement, but you don't know how, today's guest will offer you simple action steps that can help you reduce your carbon footprint. An adventurer at heart, Jim Goddard is also a man of action. His philanthropic efforts have helped communities both locally and overseas, especially in his former role as Global Director at World Vision. Now, close to home, he's part of an engaged group of Mornington Peninsula citizens who believe in taking responsibility to do their bit towards solving the global warming climate crisis. Welcome, Jim Goddard. So touch on a couple of things. International adventurer and yacht master coach, have previously been into offshore yacht racing, mountaineering and solo cycling across the world. Creator and expedition leader of an adventure challenge team inspiring and engaging audiences to raise funds for children's charities. Previously, you were the founder and president of Manly Manitou, country director and global director at World Vision, and now you're the co-founder of Repower Communities. Welcome to the podcast, Jim Goddard.
Thank you.
You're a very busy man.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I like variety in my life, that's for sure.
Just a quick one before we start, and we start talking about the organisations that you advise to and you're involved in. You're obviously a man of action and someone that believes in delivering. You've had an incredibly distinguished career to date. Where did it all start for a young Jim Goddard? Were you always the leader of the pack?
Yeah, probably. At school, I was a leader of the pack. I went to a private school, head of house, head of teams, head of sports teams, head of the sailing team. I just always had this sense that if I could lead, I should lead, really, I suppose. And then post-university, I decided to go traveling. So I spent a couple of years traveling around the world. And so this idea of kind of being independent, doing what I want to do is kind of always sort of resonated with me. Not at the cost of anybody else, but just the sense of personal drive about where I want to go.
Yeah, and that sense of leadership and the ability to lead is ultimately what creates change and
for sure,
and enables you to do what you do. Whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in England.
Okay, and when did you and how did you get to Australia?
Yeah, that's a long story, but I came to Australia when I left university for a year off, so like many backpackers do. Loved it, did some sailing here, did the Sydney Hobart, that was my dream, one of my dream yacht races to do, so I did that when I was young then, and said I'd always love to come back, and went back to the UK, worked for 10 years, finally got to a point where financially and I had enough points to get to the visa system, I could come back as a permanent visa holder. So I did that when I was 30, I think.
And outside of all the philanthropic causes that you're involved in, you mentioned you worked for 10 years. What was your career? What did you leave university and do?
So I was a civil engineer when I left, and I went into a telecoms engineering company. And literally within 6 months, I was leading a national office for that. So in the Netherlands, I had 25 people working for me. We built a GSM network in Holland for Vodafone at the time. And this is going to sound strange, but even in those very early days, I think I was 25, I just had a sense that, did I really study all this hard, just as hard as I did just for this? Is this really it? Is this the future of my life where I'm just going to work every day and it's all about exchanging time for money and helping magnify business? So straight away then I started a searching journey of really, is there more to life than this, even at that early age? And so then I carried on. Of course, I did different things. I ended up in an enterprise tech company, a US tech company called Lucent.
And living in the US, or
no,
you
living
did that
in the UK.
from the UK?
Yeah, living in the UK.
So before we get into the causes that you do drive and create change for now, and you've done some amazing things that we will touch on, what does philanthropy mean to you? You've moved on from your corporate world. You've done all these amazing things, like I said, we're going to talk about. But actual philanthropy, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I probably don't think about the term philanthropy until I was asked to consider this podcast. I mean, I understand philanthropy when I worked at World Vision, for example. Philanthropy was about getting high net worth individuals to contribute towards helping causes, and that was typically financially. But I think in this podcast, you're trying to look at philanthropy from all different angles.
Absolutely.
Giving of skills, giving of time, giving of treasure or funds. So for me, giving back is really about fullness of life. So if I was to spend all my time just building business or trying to earn income and creating a bank account for myself and a family home and all those things, which are all vitally important, but if it was just that, it wouldn't feel to me a strong sense of fullness of life. what I love about working with others in community and giving back, because ultimately when we give back in philanthropy, we're giving back at a local level somewhere, whether it's you're giving at a national, global level, ultimately it benefits a local person and a community somewhere. So you're doing it in the eyes of an individual, and it's that contribution towards and that compassion and that desire to help another individual. That's right at the heart of philanthropy to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So 10 years in your career, engineering, you've then moved into the philanthropic space with World Vision and things like that, and albeit still part of your career. What was the actual catalyst for change? When did you move, mate? You've explained to me what the change was about. The catalyst for change, though, to actually do it, it was literally just seeking more, was it?
There was quite a radical catalyst, and it was a spiritual catalyst. It was spiritual transformation. When I was 28, I became a Christian. And there was a little bit of history at my private school from a Christian upbringing, but I hadn't made a commitment in any shape or form. And as I mentioned, that exploring period in my 20s basically led me to, out of all the self-help books and everything, led me to the Christian faith. And I gave my life to Jesus. And that really just transformed everything from then on. It kind of went on a roller coaster ride, really. Doing really well in Lucent in this US tech company. And then I just had this sudden massive pull to do something more with the gifts that I had, rather than just invest it for a US tech company.
And what was the change too? So your US tech company, you've had this light bulb moment, and I know where you've ended up now, and we'll talk about the journey through World Vision, but it wasn't from there to World Vision. Where was the initial change?
It's like any change. Change takes time. It's a journey. You have to put one step in front of the other, learn as you go, learn a whole new way of doing things. And so at Lucent, the first thing that I started to do with this new sense of desire to help and support was I ran charity challenges using the skills that I had. The two skills that I used at the time were I'm passionate about sailing and adventuring, and I'm good at galvanizing and getting people together, right? So that's perfect for a charity challenge. So we ran 2 5-day charity challenges over 2 years. We had, about 1,000 supporters supporting us. We were doing it in the early days without GPS, on satellite phones, getting people in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We were sailing, getting people engaged, having parties before and after to drive sort of people to contribute to the cause. And we were using our adventuring as a way to draw people into it. So that was my early start, was using the skills and the gifts that I naturally have.
Was that for the ultimate outcome to be team building experience, or you were raising funds?
No, we were raising funds, yeah. We were raising funds and awareness.
And what were you raising funds for?
That was for children in poverty, which is what I've done for most of my life since then anyway. So that was for an organisation called Compassion in the UK, and we got hundreds of kids sponsored in poor communities across the world.
It was pretty big from the start. You're a big thinker.
Yeah. Anything that I start, I try to think about how we can scale it and make it bigger and benefit more and more.
You've answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. As you've moved through your career, even early days, have you always been so passionate about the causes that you're involved in? I mean, to create ultimate change, you need to be passionate, but you are a big thinker and you've had some incredible roles. Is it passion? Have you always had that drive?
Passion and drive is probably my hallmark, I suppose. And that's for good and for bad sometimes, right? Because you need to sometimes know when to let go and put the pedal down. But yeah, I really have desired, I guess, since that time when I was 30, which is over 20 years ago now, I've basically made this choice that I will only invest my time into things that I feel passionate about. Life's too short not to do that.
And it's easy to become really time poor, isn't it? Like in such a busy life. And someone like you who gives so much of yourself to helping others and the causes that you're involved in, you need some time for yourself, don't you?
Absolutely. And I've had difficult moments in my family life where I've put too much into my causes or to the things that I'm trying to do in life, and that's been at cost to them. And so I've had to readjust and rebalance those.
So you are a doer. You're a natural born leader. When did you discover that you wanted to make a difference and that it takes action by an individual to actually make a difference? I've done a bit of research on what you're involved in now and actually taking action yourself rather than waiting for governments to do it or other organisations to do it. How did that look for you? I mean, you were working for a company, you were involved in doing what you were doing with the yacht. At one point, you've obviously branched out, and I don't know if it was Manly Manitou that was the first thing you did. Was that the case?
Well, other than the charity challenges, which I guess was my dipping my toe in the water for something momentarily, if you forward wind sort of 5 years, landed in Australia, tried to create a new life, I had this strong sense that I should create this connection between rich and poor, two communities. And people might think about it as a community partnership or a twin city or that kind of arrangement. But we wanted to do it around this idea that everybody in the quote unquote wealthy community got engaged and learned and understood about the needs of those in the poor community, and we would learn from each other. And so that's what Manly Manado was all about, which is Manly in Sydney, Manado in Indonesia. And we ran this sort of social movement for 5 years where we had Manado, that's right. We had thousands of people involved. And it was really back to this idea of use the gifts that you have. So for some people, they gave some cash because that was easy and they were time poor. For others, it was as simple as, well, I'm fantastic at organizing things, so I'm going to get all the real estate agents in Manly together and we're going to have a huge silent auction night at the big hotel. And that was one thing organized. And then other people said, well, I'm a violin teacher, so I can talk to all my kids about other kids who are poor, who can't learn the violin, and I'll contribute a percentage of my takings from my violin lessons. I mean, I'm just trying to give you a variety. We had over 100 different examples of that in the first year of where people used their gifts in a way that allowed them to contribute towards this cause. Ultimately, what that did is raised over millions of dollars that enabled kids and families to come off the rubbish tip, which was right at the heart of Manado, which we were focused on. Gave enterprise loans to poor families so they could go and start small businesses and get out of the slums and go somewhere else. If you ask anybody who is involved, and actually it still runs today in a kind of social fashion, but if you were to ask anyone who was involved at the time, they got as much out of it as they know that the kids and the families did in Indonesia. We built this incredible sense of community around this thing for 5 years, and people were just passionate about it. It was talked about everywhere, the posters everywhere. It was almost like part of the identity of Manly that they were a contributor towards Manado and partnering with them.
As I've gone through this journey on the podcast, it's one thing that's been a common thread through everyone I've spoken to is this incredible sense of reward for helping others. And I guess that's what I wish listeners, or I hope listeners, take from the podcast is that it's all good to take and it's all good to continue to take, but at some point you need to give back. And the rewards of giving back can be just as amazing and fulfilling as getting given a gift yourself.
Well, it's the thing I talked to you about, fullness of life, right? Fullness of life is meeting many needs. And we've got physical needs, we've got emotional needs, we've got social needs, we've got financial needs. But if you don't meet all those needs, you don't have true fullness of life. You've got spiritual needs, and people do that in different ways. But when you are involved in community and supporting others, you're meeting social and emotional needs in a way that you won't get in business, in my view.
And when you're involved in the corporate world, but still raising money and all that, I mean, I would imagine you had this large network of support around you. You then go and do your own thing. There's two things here. One of them is obviously raising the money or raising the support, however that might be, volunteers, all those sorts of things. You get the money. The greatest challenge at times is often delivering that to the coalface of the problem and actually making a difference. Like I said, there's certainly a challenge in raising money, but then being able to structure and deliver that money so that it actually makes a difference is a whole new challenge in itself. How did you do that?
There's actually 2 points I'd like to cover here. The first is your point about starting, because for some of the listeners, this may be a place that they can help people who are trying to start things. So like me, I've chosen to give more of my time than maybe some others will. And others may feel that they can give more money because they're time poor. But when people are daring to get out and start something, like I've tried to do many times, in the early days of starting, you really need a supporter. You really need someone to come alongside you. And I've had those. Someone who's maybe a high net worth person who said, hey, I'll just fund, here's a couple of $1,000 to get you started. Or it's a little bit like a startup, right? In a startup, you normally find a mentor or someone who's on your side, who's helping you. So I have the inherent drive to make this thing happen, but just to have someone on your side who can give you a little bit to get going, maybe make a few connections, that's a very important thing. So if you have that ability to mentor or to help people who are trying to do things, trying to start things, that's a great way to give back. Take someone under your wing, help them out, give them a network, give them a few $1,000s to get started. That's one way.
And that's in life in general, isn't it? Like even in my corporate world now, at times I face challenges or difficulties or I'm uncertain about something. And often I've got a guy that is my mentor up in Queensland and I ring him for nonsense. I'm sure I might do his head in, but I often ring him and just simply talking through it with him and having someone there to bounce ideas off, be a sounding board and have some interaction and feedback. Actually hang up the phone and you've found the answer that you probably already had. But the certainty and surety that you get from bouncing off someone else,
yeah, that's right,
enables you to make the decision and move forward.
But in this case, in a philanthropic cause where someone is daring to create something for nothing in their free time, that's even more important because now they're trading. They're saying, well, I'm not going to work like I do this every day. I could go and work for money or I could go and do this thing I'm passionate about. And hopefully I can bring the two together. But if I can't, then I've got a choice every day. And people who are passionate find that they actually spend more of their time doing the things for free than they do. And I've got a team full of them at the moment. They spend more of their time doing things for free than they do for money. And so when people are daring to do that, someone who's got funds coming alongside to support them is a great help. And it just gives them a sense of surety.
So that helps you with the startup, that helps you with the structuring, and helps you on the journey. Delivering the solution overseas would have incredible challenges, I would imagine. How did you go about that?
Yes, the way we did it is we just did it with partner organizations. So we worked with 2 organizations, Compassion, the same one I worked with earlier, and Bridge of Hope. So there's no point recreating the wheel, right? And redoing it all again. They already have those systems in place. There were 2 local organizations in Manado. And so it's just about due diligence. And it's the same that we're doing now in Repower. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's about doing due diligence of the organizations that you want to partner with, creating a great relationship. And then, in essence, I guess what I've tried to see myself as is more of a magnifier on an issue and a galvanizer of people around the issue. I'm not trying to create a charity in end-to-end full value chain sense. So there are others doing that already. I don't need any more charities in the world necessarily. We just need to sort of magnify the causes that they're working on.
60,000 charities in Australia at the moment. Is it too many?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the things that's not talked about much in this sector is the merging of charities. For public benefit, really. If you were to merge 5 charities doing a similar cause, then you get, all the benefits of scale that we know that come, reduced cost and better effectiveness and better outcomes for the beneficiaries. But it's hard because people have created those individual charities out of passion and conviction, and it's got a personal identity stamp on it. I know that because I've done it, and you have to see a bigger picture. And so I think anyone who's leading a charity or a philanthropic organization, they should always be open to merge.
It's a conversation we have every single day. My wife works or donates her time to a charity in Frankston. There's 4 charities in Frankston at the moment that do exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
exactly the same thing. One of them's probably got a stuffed fridge. The other one's got roof leaks, so they can't fix the other one. And I always say to her, why don't these 4 get together? They're doing the same thing. And merge and bring together their intellect, bring together their funding. But like you said, they've all got this sense of identity. They all want to run their own show. And it almost brings on, and this is my concern about having so many charities, and if you did merge them together, firstly, they would be so much better, and we would eliminate this donor fatigue that we've got now because there's so many organisations banging their own drum. I think there is a bit of donor fatigue at the moment, and especially coming out of COVID, where there's been all these charities that have really done it hard.
One thing to think about in that sense is that the donor has the power. So the shareholder has the power in a business to vote, right? What the business should do. But in a charity, the donor has the power. So donors could come together and say, you guys need to merge. Just thinking out loud about that. That's a conversation that's not really had very often.
Yeah, you mentioned it before. We touched on it with having someone by your side and how important that is. And teamwork is a major thing. It's a massive thing. And obviously through yachting and through your team building things that you've done and everything you've done on your journey so far, how critical is it to have proper teamwork in any organisation to be able to deliver on the outcome that you're trying to achieve?
I mean, there's not a single person who wouldn't say it's critical to that. So I guess in an organization like the way that I've tried to create them, we're creating an organization out of an inspiring vision because that's really the only thing that draws people in, because there's no cash reward. There's only the sense of giving back reward, the emotional and social reward. So the vision has to be super clear. The sense of cause and the sense of betterment of society has to be super clear. And in terms of building that team, you have to be able to envision them well so that they can see there's value for them. And then ultimately, creating teams out of volunteers is quite a lot harder than creating teams out of non-volunteers because they don't have to be there. So as a leader of that, you have to continually be investing into the inspiration of them to warrant their time.
Yeah, and that was sort of half a loaded question for me. One being the charities that we go and we engage with, one of the core values or the things that we experience from the outside looking in is the ones that do it really, really well, have a really, really good team. And they work together. They're not out there trying to set the world alight on their own. They really do have this sense of team, and they do it really well, don't they? Next question is, you've gone from there into a serious role at World Vision. That's a massive jump up the ladder to become director here and then a global director at World Vision. And like I said, that's a serious role, serious budgets, big money, big deliverables. How did that look for you and what brought that on?
Well, I guess after effectively jumping from corporate world into starting a social movement, which then got noticed, and then I consulted to a couple of nonprofits, including World Vision, and then ultimately they asked me to join them. So that was an 11-year journey where I started in Australia and then ultimately joined World Vision International and worked globally for them. I guess just like anyone in a large organization, if you deliver, then you get promoted. So eventually I ended up running child sponsorship fundraising globally for World Vision. And I guess it just brought all my skills together really because I'd had a good education. I'd had the first 10 years in the corporate world where I had some understanding of how corporates worked. and I've got my leadership capabilities and I understand my passions, and that all really comes together in that role. So yeah, it was an absolute privilege. It was an incredible role for 5 years.
One of my guests on the podcast been Reverend Tim Costello, and I've learned a bit about World Vision and what an amazing organisation it is. What did you manage to achieve there? I know that you did some amazing things there.
I know Tim well, so hi, Tim. But yeah, in the last 5 years, we basically worked on turning around, transforming child sponsorship from an age-old kind of sending letters and receiving Christmas cards in the mail kind of thing to a complete digital experience. And so that 5-year turnaround, business transformation, digital transformation is what I led and worked on for 5 years. And that's piloting and being scaled out in different countries across the world at the moment.
And what were the challenges that you faced there? I mean, World Vision's a massive organisation. To go from something where you had ultimate control of to into a role where you're part of a massive team, were you able to deliver what you wanted to deliver?
So we have 37,000 staff. 20,000 of those at least are working on child sponsorship, and probably about 1,000 of those are involved in fundraising or some sort in 54 different countries. So yeah, a lot of countries, a lot of people. Ultimately, I still brought the same skills to bear, which is inspirational leadership, galvanizing, envisioning, clear strategy, and then biggest thing I learned along the way was how to influence people. Because if you work for World Vision International, you have no authority. You can only do it by influence. So it's a federated model, a little bit like federal government here. You can't tell the states what to do. And so I had 54 countries to work with, or 27 markets to work with, and you can't tell them what to do. You have to add value to them for them to work with you. And so I learned that skill dramatically over those 5 years.
What's the core cause? What's the main cause of World Vision? What do World Vision do?
Well, the main thing for World Vision is to bring life in all its fullness to children, to vulnerable children. So if you're a poor child living in Somalia with your mum and dad in a small rural community and you lack water and you lack food, your family lack access to markets for their grain or for their small business, then all of those contextual effects that are causing you to be in vulnerability and in poverty, World Vision works on all those things around that child. So the focus is the child, but we work with all the actors to ensure that we improve the whole environment.
And the reason I asked what World Vision do is because it's very different to what you're doing now in this stage of your life. I've got a whole heap of other questions that I want to ask you, but let's get on to that. Repower. That's what you're about now. You're based here on the Mornington Peninsula. You live on the Mornington Peninsula. You've gone from a global stage with world poverty and the cause that World Vision does to quite a local stage now and doing something very different. What's Repower?
So Repower Mornington Peninsula, or Repower Communities, is basically a local community decarbonisation and renewable energy network. So it's probably easiest to see us as a social movement again. Our desire is to help Mornington Peninsula residents as a community decarbonise, reduce their emissions, carbon emissions, and effectively do their bit to reduce the emissions that are going into the climate that are causing climate harm going forwards. So reduce man-made emissions.
And to look into that further, why is that so important?
Yeah, so that takes us from the jump from World Vision to that, back to your point. So the last couple of years at World Vision, we were impacting 15 million children and their families across the world with the funds that we were raising, over $1 billion being raised. And that was a very effective way to help many, many children and their families. But over the last couple of years, there's this strong sense that everything that we're doing, and it's critically urgent and important because, for example, in Africa, there's more and more children suffering right now because of climatic problems. That climate is going to undo or cause more issues going forward. So over the last 20 years, we've reduced poverty rates across the world dramatically. I think it's about 50% over the last 20 years, which is an incredible feat by many organizations. But climate change is going to turn that trajectory around because we're going to put more children and families back into poverty by virtue of climatic events. And so to me, it was a bigger justice issue to switch to, which was I really feel like I need to move myself strategically to applying leadership into man-made climate change and to reversing that.
And is that what led you leaving World Vision to do what you're doing now?
Exactly. I mean, there are other factors as well. Worked 10 years, 2 transformation programs, tired, needed a break, all those things. But ultimately, it was a sense of calling, I suppose, I would call it, towards the bigger issue, which is helping apply leadership to solving man-made climate change.
We talked before about the importance of having someone walking by your side. Who's involved with you with Repower? Who's the person by your side now?
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple of people in the community that jumped on really quickly when I started speaking about it, and that helped a lot to have some early partners. And that's probably it. I don't have anyone necessarily in the energy sector that's supporting us. But there are a couple of other community energy groups that we've leveraged from and learned from across Australia that are doing great things. I mean, there are about 100 in Australia now. So I guess those people who set those up have gone before us, have already set the vision and set the opportunity. So you're not going out on it alone.
And you're shining a light on and bringing attention to the cause. What can people do to bring about change to help achieve your vision?
Yeah, well, I guess it's the vision that we all need to have, which is wherever we live, we should be living as soon as we can with zero emissions for our energy. So our focus is energy, fundamentally. There's lots of emissions from other areas, but 42% of Australian emissions come from households and small businesses. So basically every household needs to make a change and every small business needs to make a change over the next 5 years, because we're never going to reach to a 45% decline in emissions by 2030, which is the minimum government requirement. But also, I've just been listening to COP27, which is the agenda of climate change. They're now talking that it really needs to be about 70%, which is lucky because that's our vision for the Mornington Peninsula.
I read that.
Yeah.
Is it achievable? Do you think it will happen?
Anything is achievable with will, isn't it? It's like transformation inside an organization when you've got 30,000 people. If you've got the will, you've got the leadership. It is about those two things, probably in reverse, leadership and the will, then you can achieve anything as a human team, so to speak, however big that team is.
And you've got the vision and you've got the leadership ability, but it's going to take people to do their own part. You've got a target, you're driving towards achieving that. Are we on track to achieve that? Or do we need significant change to be able to reach that target?
We need significant change to achieve the target. So your question before was, what could people do? Let me go through a few things that people could do. It's best to think about it in five fundamental choices that everyone can make. The first choice is that as a consumer, you have a choice where you buy your power from. So the first thing is you've got to get off gas. So stop buying gas. And we'll talk about the implications of that in a minute. The second thing is that the power that you buy should be renewable energy power. So if you buy from lots of different retailers, some retailers have higher percentages of renewable energy generation in their availability.
I don't mean to cut you off, but who are they for listeners? Who are they? Who should people be looking at as their energy retailer?
Well, the best of the best in Australia is Diamond Energy at the moment. Basically, the energy that you use, because electrons can't travel miles from Mornington Peninsula or from northeastern Victoria to Mornington Peninsula. But in essence, if you use energy here, they will match that by generating energy from renewable sources around Victoria. Like for like, basically. And there are others as well. And the best thing to do is to go onto the Green retailer website, and they'll give you the top 10 retailers across the country. So that's the first thing, is to basically just switch the purchase of your power to green electricity. That's the first thing to do. That's the simplest thing. It doesn't even cost you any more, really. It's the simplest thing we can all do. By virtue of doing that, you're now investing in renewables into the country, because the more customers that Diamond and other organizations get, the more wind farms and solar farms they can build. I mean, it's a simple consumer choice that makes a massive difference. The second thing that you can do is to basically electric hot water. So if you're using gas hot water, you've got to get off it. That's burning a fossil fuel. So these 5 things are all about stopping burning fossil fuels. So you've got to look at where you burn fossil fuels and stop it, basically. And so if you use gas hot water, you've got to move to electric hot water and move to a heat pump. It's cheaper. It'll cost you a couple of $1,000 to get started, but you'll earn your money back very quickly. The third thing is electric heating. So if you're using gas heating, same thing. You've got to stop the gas heating and move to electric heating, ACs. Now, ACs and heat pumps for hot water are effectively the same technology. You're actually getting an efficiency ratio of 4:1. So you're using a quarter of the power to get the same unit of heat out of it that you are with gas. So you're saving a huge amount of money by doing that. The fourth thing is electric cooking. So if you're using gas, stop, move to induction cooking. And induction cooking is as good, if not better, than gas cooking now, the latest induction tops. And then the fifth thing is electric transport, which is a longer term play, which is if you're burning petrol and diesel in your cars, you've got to move to an EV.
And we talked before about the organisation, but then the creating change at the actual coalface of the problem. Are people listening? Those 5 things, are people starting to do that at a rate that you're happy with, that needs to happen?
Well, they're definitely doing it. So I guess our aim is to accelerate over trend, right? That's how I think about it. It's already happening just because of government legislation, what's in the news, narratives, incentives, etc. But our aim is to accelerate that. So if you go back to number 1, which was renewable energy, of course, that involves also the opportunity for you to buy solar. So if you put solar on your roof, now you become your own little power station, right? And if you're kicking gas off, then basically all the energy that you're using in your house is self-generated. So, which is what we've just done in our house. We're now a net zero house, as we call it, which is we're generating more electricity on the rooftop every day than we're using across the 24-hour period. So we are now a net zero house and a contributor back to the grid on a daily basis.
Those 5 things that people can do as a homeowner is one thing. But on a larger scale, are corporate organisations moving away from the traditional ways of power generation? And are we doing enough in regards to wind farms, solar farms, all the sorts of things that retail or energy generators need to do to make change. I mean, it's good that the houses are doing that.
Yes.
But ultimately, large organisations need to move into that sector, don't they?
Yeah, and they are. I mean, I think it's about 70% of the ASX companies now have commitments to net zero, and having a commitment and a target to net zero is one thing, but putting action behind it, of course, is different. But the early adopters of that, they have these things called ESG strategies, so environment, social governance strategy, which they implement into their organization. That basically means that they have to reduce their emissions, and so they're buying what they call PPA, power purchase agreements, with other wind farms or solar farms, or they're investing and buying their own. If you take Amazon, for example, they're building their own solar generation and wind generation farms. So it's definitely happening. Because of government legislation and because of targets and all the ratings around ESG, which are now into annual reports, and boards and governance structures are now starting to ask for it, it's going to pick up radical speed. So the household shouldn't be concerned that the uptown corporates are not moving. They're moving rapid pace. We just need every household and small business to do the same.
There's so many sectors that need to embrace change to make it happen, and one of them's the homeowner. Then there's the power generators. Is the government doing enough in regards to policy change and enforcing? I mean, there's a new NCC coming out, new construction guidelines around 6-star, 7-star, things like that. Yes. Is the government doing enough?
Well, you could say, without trying to be too political, it's 10 years too late. Which is without a doubt been on ice and on hold for 10 years. And so we've got more change happening in 6 months than we've had for a decade, which is phenomenal. So we're behind in terms of where we should be. Australia should be a best case study in the world for this. It's easier for us to do this shift than anyone else, really. We've got the means, we've got the weather, we've got the sun, we've got all these things. So other than the fact that we're behind, of course, there's new legislation that needs to come in. Certain areas that we think could be improved upon, things that come to mind are ensuring that vehicle to home. So if you get an electric vehicle, that's a big battery. And so that's a perfect size battery. A big battery in a small EV can run a house for 2 days. So why put a separate battery into a house if you've got a car in the garage? Do you know what I mean? So enabling the legislation that enables vehicle to home or vehicle to grid, which is basically that dual charging link to work. If we had that now, then straight away people would be buying more EVs, less home batteries, and it would all make sense long term. So that's one thing, which is smaller. Another thing is around our whole distribution network is set up with generating power in one place and distributing it to tens of thousands of places. But the future is a distributed generation network where we're generating in thousands of places. And so at the moment, we have high charges for the costs of transferring energy from a centrally distributed to those places. So there's legislation that kind of stops the value add or the value creation of distributed energy generation and distribution at a local rate. Does that make sense? So if you've taken the Mornington Peninsula, for much of the year, we should be able to self-use and trade locally. But the trading, because we looked into this really early on because we were super excited about it, the trading of power between me and you on the Mornington Peninsula, between our houses, like you've got solar and I haven't, or you've got more than I have, doesn't add any. There's no value creation in it at the moment. And part of that is because of just the costs associated with distribution and the government legislation around it. So to me, if you were to free that up, you'd move from this central play to a distributed play, which would be very powerful.
And you're concentrated on the Mornington Peninsula. We talk about Australia being 10 years behind. Global warming, this is a global problem. How far behind are we on a global level?
I guess there's different ways to look at it. From a leadership perspective, we're rapidly picking up pace. So my understanding is at COP27 is that we've been welcomed with open arms. And some of the projects that have been announced recently, like the Sun Power, huge solar farm in the Northern Territory, and Andrew Forrest's work with Future Forest Industries, and all, the incredible green hydrogen focus there. So I think we're back onto the main stage again, and we're seeing as a leader. So I wouldn't say that we are necessarily behind in our aspirations anymore, but we are behind, say, the best of the best in terms of penetration of electric vehicles, of heat pumps, all those things. We've got too much gas going into our networks, etc.
Who's doing it properly?
It's always the Nordics. Norway, Finland, those guys are doing the best. And although I was asked this question the other day on a call actually about China, we tend to think of, well, what we do is irrelevant because China are doing X. Well, China are actually effectively decarbonizing faster than anybody, but they're also growing faster than most people, right? And so balancing those tensions where they're trying to get hundreds of millions of people out of poverty through economic growth at the same time as to also reduce their emissions is a huge tension. But if you look at the investment that's going into renewables, the pace of change that they're doing building renewables, it beats us by miles.
And with here in Australia building renewables, talking to Mike Cannon-Brooks, there's a very clear picture. There's a very clear structure on decommissioning and shutting down gas-fired electricity generation. Are we building solar farms and wind farms at a rate that is going to be able to take up the power supply that we're going to lose through shutting them down so quickly? Or is there a gap there? I mean, there is a gap spoken about. Is that reality?
I don't have enough data to know that. Well, I guess all I know is that wherever a government has moved fast, like the New South Wales government, where they've got these renewable energy zones, which you've probably heard, and Victoria will do the same, they've opened up for tender for that, and they're oversubscribed tenfold by the people who want to build. So the government has created this opportunity where now there's an investment direction for people, and so investment's pouring into Australia. Every day I read about there's a new buyout or an investment or take up from a European organization or an American organization. It's just flooding in. So
it is flooding in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Moving forward, what do you see for Repower? Where do you want to take it?
Well, the aim of Repower basically in the next 8 years is to get to a 70% reduction by 2030. And it's all about getting the message out to as many households and small businesses as possible. But it's not just sort of banging the drum. It's also providing easy and simple ways for people to take action. So just this week, actually, we're going to be releasing another program to help people make it easy for them. So the other benefit of distributed energy in this way is that you start buying local. You start using local suppliers, local contractors. So a couple of weeks ago, we released a program with a local energy efficiency scorecard assessor. So that's great. So anyone on the peninsula can do that. We're just about to release a program with 2 solar providers, and we've got a few more lined up behind that. We're going to partnership with a green retailer to enable people to access that. So instead of people having to search out all over the place, because there's so many offers, aren't there? So many promotions, so many things. It's like, well, if you want to come, and no one's stopping you do that, but if you want to come to a recommended source, we will provide that for you to make it simple. And if you want to get off gas, we'll provide you a recommended player to do that. And they'll be local because we want you to invest local. So if you sort of come back out of it for a second, you've probably heard of Saul Griffiths, who's a well-known engineer in this country who was in America and has been advising the Biden administration on electrification. He's come back to Australia because he believes that there's a huge opportunity for Australia to lead the world in this, to prove that we can electrify the households, electrify our suburbs. And back to the 5 things that I mentioned, he's done the analytics and the groundwork to prove that if a household was to do those 5 things, basically within a 10-year period, they'd be $5,000 a year better off per household. Now, if you imagine that $5,000 per household is now being invested locally because they're no longer paying it to an overseas energy company, or they're paying it to wherever, or to filling up the car with petrol, and that goes to another overseas energy company, they're effectively, because it's electric generation on their rooftop, because they control their own energy use locally, that money is now savings that they're going to spend in the local community.
Is the government doing enough by way of grants and things like that to help people make the change? Is it expensive? I mean, most houses now probably do have gas heating, probably do have gas cooking. It's certainly previously been the most affordable way to heat a home. Is the government doing enough to help people change? I imagine there's people out there that probably want to change that simply can't afford to.
Yeah, so it's back to one of those incentives about if the government was really behind this, then they would be incentivizing people to get off gas. And so the first thing you'd be doing is making sure that no new houses are built with gas. That's ridiculous, isn't it, to build that? So that to me should be shut off as soon as possible. I think it's still a little bit. And then secondly, they should be incentivizing people to get off gas in an easy way. Because ultimately, as Saul says in his book, The Big Switch, which I really recommend for people to read, basically, there are 10 million appliances that burn fossil fuels in this country, and we have to shift them over the next 5 to 8 years. And that comes at a cost to the individual household, but also should be incentivized by the government. Because actually, if you take that block and you say, we're going to incentivize that block to shift, to move to a full electrification and get off fossil fuels, that's probably one of the best investments in our national infrastructure that we could probably ever have. Do you know what I mean? So putting a couple of $1 billion behind that to incentivize that to happen would be a very smart move.
One of the challenges for you, Jim, is getting the message out there. And then I would imagine one of the challenges for homeowners is actually doing the conversion, is doing those 5 things that we spoke about. Most families probably wouldn't be able to afford to do it. What's their options?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back to what we talked about, government legislation, anything governments can do to help incentivize people to do that. So they incentivize solar by giving you a rebate. They incentivize heat pumps. There's an incentivization for heat pumps at the moment for hot water. So more that governments could do that, the better. That helps. But the other thing is the quote that I mentioned earlier about the saving of $5,000 that families will make by electrifying their households and transport over 10 years. Sorry, it's $5,000 per year by the time we get to 10 years. And they'll start saving completely from year 5. That includes the financing cost to do so. So for me, I've gone net zero in my home, but I did it on my mortgage. So I borrowed against my mortgage, that whatever it is, the 10 or 20,000 it cost me to do that, to put the solar on the roof, to put the heat pumps in, to do the ACs, to kick everything else. And effectively, I'm paying, 5% on that or so, but I'm saving on it every month by virtue of not buying fossil fuels. Do you see what I mean? So there's different financing mechanisms. You can use your mortgage. If you don't have that, you can use a green loan. There's a couple of banks that do green loans, like NAB is one, Bank of Australia is another. There are others that do it.
And is that almost like a personal loan, is it, that people can go and get or secured against their home for the purpose of
I believe so, yes.
going green?
And then you've got Bright, which is something that's set up by Mike Cannon Brooks, BRIGHTE. They also finance green change, so to speak. But then there's another fund called the Sustainable Australia Fund, SAF. And if you're a small business, they provide opportunities. They link with the council for you to do an environmental upgrade finance. And so if you're a small business and you want to convert off gas, you can go to SAF. They will give you a loan and you pay that back through your rates over the next 10 years. It's a phenomenal mechanism to effectively have no upfront cost at all.
So if you're wanting to make the change and you can't afford it, I mean, there is options out there. But as a direct call to action, how do people do that? Is there a website, or how do they research it? Do they reach out to their bank, or do they jump online and look at SAF, or do they look at Bright, or what's the best way for them to start the journey?
So if you're a small business, we're about to put in place a partnership with SAF so that you'll be able to get that on our website. We don't yet have finance options for solar or anything, but if you go to our website and look at the personal actions page, where it basically lists all the things that you can do, and it gives you links to all the options. So if you are looking for a heat pump to replace your hot water, it'll give you a link to government rebates.
So most of the information, if not all of it, can be found on your website.
Exactly.
So it's repowermornpen.org.au.
That's correct. Yep. Go to the personal actions page, look through those. Any links you'll find will take you either to savings or rebates. And then if you go to our programs page, you'll find the programs that we've actually got that you can buy local, and the rebates will be included.
Perfect. 70% reduction by 2030. That's your goal. We've got 70% of the ASX listed companies with climate change policy in their in their future. We've got a country that manufactures nothing. We don't manufacture white goods, cars. I mean, we do nothing. We're a country built on services, really, and natural resources, and selling gas is one of our biggest. A big organisation's really behind creating change. I mean, gas export is one of our biggest exports.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the person to answer that question. Like you, I'm a spectator because I'm not involved in advising or consulting to those large organizations. I'm working with smaller organizations, but I think there's a long way to go still. Let's put it that way.
So we've talked about we've talked about World Vision, we've talked about all the things you're doing now with Repower, and we've talked about the future of Repower. What's the future of Jim Goddard?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there are two things that I'm working on. One is that I would love this concept of Repower. We're not alone, by the way. There are other community energy groups doing similar. The only difference, I think, is that we have a local postcode dashboard that basically makes it real. So if you were living in Red Hill, you could look at the dashboard and you could say that if we want to create change here in the next year and have a 10% decline, we know exactly what we need to do against the data. And that kind of data-centric thing is helping people make good choices.
Real-time data?
It's not real-time, but it's every year.
It's accurate.
Yeah, it's accurate, yeah. And so investing into that and to make that model, which is basically an empowered local postcode-based model where postcodes can take ownership to drive down based against data, to me suddenly makes this achievable. So I'd love to see that scale. It doesn't have to scale under Repower's name or anything else, but I'd love to be part of scaling that and bringing the Saul Griffiths idea and the other community energy groups together and the Repower, some of the things we've learned, bring all that together, creating a best practice collaboration force and effectively driving that across Australia. That's what I'd love to, and I would lead that if I could get funding to do it. That's one thing I'd love to do. The second thing, which I've been working on is how to support organizations effectively transform themselves inside out culturally, but also to their customers. If they have an ESG strategy, or when they get an ESG strategy, that strategy basically plays out. You've got organizational purpose, which is who are we? What do we stand for? Why are we here?
For the listeners, what's ESG?
So environmental, sustainability and governance strategy. And it's a requirement now really for all listed companies, or will be very soon for all listed companies to have that as part of their governance structure. Basically, it means that a big organization needs to align their sense of purpose, their why. Why are we here? And what dent are we going to make in the universe? Why do we exist? With the social and environmental impacts they're going to make too. They don't just exist to make profit, they exist to solve a problem in society. And let's make that clear. But in the process of reimagining that, an organization has an opportunity to create better propositions to their customers, which are authentic and real. And that sort of transformation is what I would love to focus on helping organizations do too.
And the main thing that you need to take it across the country nationally, you said, is funding. Is that achievable? What sort of funding are you looking at? Are you getting donors behind you that are willing to jump on board and help push the cause?
Not at the moment.
Or is that something that...
It's something that I need to work on and need to find funding for. So it's funding personally for my own time to commit because I've got a young family and I can't keep doing this for nothing forever. So it's either moving back to a more balanced portfolio where I do some work and some repower and that's for nothing, or we look at this community electrification thing for real and we get some investment behind it and I take that full time with some funding.
You do some incredible things, and one of the things I was actually going to ask you at the start of the podcast, how do you find time for family?
Actually, family time now, since I left World Vision, is even more important. So working globally for World Vision, I worked from home, so that meant I had a lot of time for family, but I have plenty of time for family now. I make that an absolute priority. So, well, it's all part of that, what we talked about earlier, fullness of life, right? You can't invest into one of these areas and miss out the other areas. You've got to manage the whole, and that's what gives you fullness of life.
Within Repower, have you got a platform at the moment that people can donate to for funding?
We have, yeah.
Yep.
If you go onto our website, then you can donate.
How do people engage? Get onto your website?
Yep, repowermornpen.org.au.
Sure. So a couple of things out there outside of the 5 things that people need to do, which is converting as many aspects of their home to gas, from gas to power as they can. Read The Big Switch. Diamond Energy as a retailer.
Or other retailers through Greenpeace Guide, yep.
What else can people do, listeners that are wanting to engage? Jump on the website, help with financial donations, do the 5, do the other things we've talked about. What else? What's the message from Jim?
The big ultimate message out of all these things is stop burning fossil fuels and start using renewable energy. Yeah, that's the ultimate message wherever you are. You've just got to look at your life on a daily basis and think, how do I stop putting fossil fuel-based emissions into the atmosphere? Anything you can do to do that would be great.
What a message. Well, I know that you're super busy, your time's important. Can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us today on the podcast. It's been great. And again, thank you.
Pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
A huge thank you to Jim Goddard for making time to talk with me today, and most importantly for shining a light on the simple action steps we can take to make a difference locally and contribute to the zero carbon energy movement. To learn more about Repower Mornington Peninsula and what you can do in your own local community, check out our show notes for contact details.
To learn more about the art of giving back in whatever way you can, visit our website andrewpurdie.com.au and follow us on Instagram, The Hidden Philanthropist. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Philanthropist podcast, proudly presented by the Purdie Foundation.